Tell everyone it has been an absolute pleasure working with them. I watched the elevator doors slide shut on my boss's stunned face. The heavy steel panel clicked, and as the cabin began its descent toward the lobby, my phone started buzzing in my palm. The screen showed Edward Bennett's name. I let out a long, slow breath, sliding my thumb across the glass to answer. "Edward," I said, keeping my voice as flat and level as a desert highway. "Donald, where the hell are you?" Edward's voice was tight, bordering on panic. "The entire Orion Capital delegation is in the lobby. Alan Pierce is already here. We are supposed to be upstairs in the boardroom signing the papers in 15 minutes. We are about to make history. Where are you?" "There is a change of plans," I replied. "I am no longer with Bennett Financial Solutions." A long, heavy silence stretched across the line. I could hear the faint hum of the elevator cables and the distant chatter of the lobby through his end of the connection. "What are you talking about, Donald? Is this some last-minute negotiation stunt? Because if it is not funny. It is no stunt, Edward. I was terminated 10 minutes ago, effective immediately. Terminated? On signing day? That is impossible. Who would even do that?" "I suggest you ask your son," I said. The elevator bell chimed as the doors slid open. The lobby was a vast expanse of polished granite and floor-to-ceiling glass. In the center, surrounded by a dozen advisors and lawyers, stood Alan Pierce. He was holding his phone to his ear, his brow furrowed as he gestured to his team. Further back, near the security desk, I saw Devin Bennett. He was 26, fresh out of business school, and had been appointed as our new vice president of Human Resources and Operations just this morning. He was standing there with a smug look on his face, holding a leather-bound copy of the employee handbook. "No tactic, Alan," I said, speaking directly to him as I stepped out of the elevator. "I am just giving you a heads up. I suggest you talk to Edward about how they plan to run this company now." I hung up and walked across the lobby. I was carrying a cardboard box filled with 3 years of my life, my coffee mug, a few framed photos, and a leather notebook. Alan spotted me immediately. The confusion on his face turned to instant alarm. He ended his call and walked toward me, his team trailing behind him. "Donald, what is going on?" He looked at the box in my hands. The security guard was watching us from the desk. Alan reached out and gripped my shoulder, refusing to let me walk past. "Are we ready to sign this $4 billion merger, or what?" I took a steady breath, looking him straight in the eye. I also made sure Devin, who had strolled over to watch, could hear every word. "Afraid not, Alan. The deal is off. Devin here just fired me." Alan's hand dropped from my shoulder, his face turned rigid, and he slowly turned to face Devin, who was now standing a few feet away. His eyes were cold. "You did what?" Alan asked. Devin's smug expression wavered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered, clutching the employee handbook like a shield. "I was simply enforcing company protocol, sir," Devin said, his voice high and defensive. "We have to maintain standards. Section 12 of the Employee Handbook clearly states that all corporate officers must wear formal lace-up leather dress shoes. Mr. Vance is wearing black orthopedic walking shoes. It is a direct violation of our professional code on day 1 of my tenure." Alan stared at him. The silence in the lobby was deafening. The entire Orion Capital investment team was frozen, staring at Devin in disbelief. "You fired the lead architect of a $4 billion merger because of his shoes?" Alan's voice was quiet, but it carried a terrifying edge. Before Devin could answer, the elevator doors opened again, and Edward Bennett rushed out, followed by 3 members of our board. His tie was slightly crooked, and sweat stood out on his forehead. "Alan, please," Edward said, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Let us not get ahead of ourselves. Donald is a vital part of this firm. This is clearly just a minor misunderstanding. We can sort this out in the boardroom." But Alan was already turning away, waving his hand to his team. I caught pieces of what he was saying to his lead attorney. "If this is how they treat the man who built the deal, what is their word worth?" Edward hurried over to me, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Donald, please, let us go to my office. We can talk about this privately. Devin is young. He was just being overzealous on his first day. We can fix this right now." "There is nothing to fix, Edward," I said, keeping my voice loud enough for the board members to hear. "Your son made a decision. He told me that my 30 years of corporate experience did not matter if I could not follow basic dress rules. and you stood by and let him run the department. I accept the decision. I had been recovering from a minor foot surgery for the past 2 weeks. The black orthopedic shoes were prescribed by my doctor to prevent permanent joint damage while the bones healed. I had explained this to Devin, but he had dismissed it as an excuse. Alan turned back to us, his face set in stone. Edward, our agreement was with Donald. He is the one who understands the synergy between our firms. Without him, we do not have a deal. You cannot just walk away, Edward protested, his voice cracking. The contracts are printed. The press release is scheduled for noon. We have spent millions preparing for this. Actually, we can, Alan said. He looked at his attorney, who nodded. Page 17, Section 4 of the agreement, the key person clause. Donald Vance is specifically named. If he leaves the firm prior to closing for any reason other than death or permanent disability, Orion has the right to terminate the agreement without penalty. I had insisted on that clause during the initial drafts to protect my own position in case Edward tried to push me out after the merger. Now, it was the very anchor that would drag the company down. Donald wrote that clause, one of our board lawyers whispered to Edward. It is ironclad. We cannot sue them. Alan extended his hand to me. Donald, when the dust settles, call me. Talent like yours is wasted in a place like this. With that, Alan and his entire team turned and walked out of the glass doors, leaving Edward and the board standing in the middle of the lobby. I looked at Edward once, nodded, and then walked out into the bright morning air. Behind me, I could hear Edward shouting my name, but I did not look back. I had a box in my hands, no job, and a foot that was finally starting to feel a little better. The air outside the office felt different. It was crisp, clean, and carried the scent of early spring. I walked to the parking garage, my orthopedic shoes making a soft, rhythmic sound against the concrete. When I reached my sedan, I placed the cardboard box on the passenger seat, sat behind the wheel, and turned off my phone. I did not want to hear the alerts. I did not want to read the messages that I knew would be coming from every board member and executive at the firm. For the first time in 3 years, I drove home without checking my calendar or responding to an urgent email at a red light. I had spent those 3 years working 14-hour days, neglecting my health, and skipping family dinners just to keep Bennett Financial Solutions from going under. The firm had been bleeding clients when I took the lead strategist role. I had rebuilt their client list, restructured their debt, and spent 18 months negotiating the merger with Orion Capital. It was supposed to be my crowning achievement. Instead, I was sitting on my back porch at 2 in the afternoon, watching the wind move through the maple trees. It was peaceful. By evening, I turned on my tablet just to check the financial news. The headlines were brutal. Bennett Financial Solutions stock had plunged 28% in afternoon trading on rumors that the Orion merger had collapsed. The next morning, it fell another 15%. Analysts were already talking about a potential liquidity crisis. The company had leveraged itself heavily to prepare for the merger, and without Orion's capital injection, they were walking on a very thin wire. My phone had over 45 missed calls and 80 text messages. I ignored them all. 3 days later, my brother Gary came over. We sat on the deck, drinking coffee. Gary was 55, retired from the civil service, and had always told me that I was letting the corporate world eat me alive. "You look different," Gary said, studying my face. "Your shoulders are not up around your ears for once." "I got fired, Gary." "I heard," he said, leaning back. "The news is everywhere. They are saying the board is in a panic. But how do you feel?" "Honestly, I feel like a weight has been lifted. But 3 years of my life are gone. I sacrificed my health for that company. I stayed up until 3 Class D a.m. writing those contracts. And they let a kid who has never run a lemonade stand fire me because of my footwear. They did not deserve you." "Donald," Gary said. "Edward is a weak man. He wanted his son to have a title, and he did not have the guts to tell him no. Now they are paying the price. Let them drown. I wanted to. A part of me wanted to just sit on my porch, collect my severance, and watch the company go bankrupt. But another part of me, the competitive drive that had kept me in the business for 30 years, was not finished. I did not want to save the company, but I wanted to make sure they understood the exact cost of their stupidity. 10 days after the firing, Edward finally managed to get through to me. He called from a private number, probably realizing I was blocking the office lines. I answered because I was curious. "Donald, please do not hang up," Edward said. He sounded like a man who had not slept in a week. His voice was hoarse and trembling. "I am listening, Edward," I said, keeping my tone casual. "We need you to come back. The board is desperate. The stock is down 55% since you left. Our creditors are threatening to call in our loans. We are looking at bankruptcy within 6 months if we cannot get Orion back to the table." "And why is that my problem?" I asked. "Your son told me I was a liability because I did not look the part." Edward let out a ragged sigh. "Devin was wrong. He has been stripped of his VP title and moved to a junior position in the research division where he cannot touch operations." "I apologize, Donald. I am apologizing again. It was a terrible mistake." "A mistake is typos in a draft, Edward. Firing your lead strategist on signing day because of medical shoes is structural incompetence." "The board wants to meet with you," Edward pleaded. "They told me to offer you whatever you want." "Name your price, Donald. Just come to the meeting tomorrow." I looked down at my feet. The recovery was almost complete, and I was back in regular shoes, but the memory of standing in that lobby while Devin smirked was still fresh. "I will meet with the board," I said, "but it will be today, not tomorrow, and I will bring my own terms." 3 hours later, I walked into the boardroom. I wore the exact same charcoal suit and the exact same black orthopedic shoes I had been wearing when I was fired. The board members, 12 men and women who had sat in silence during my termination, all stood up when I entered. Their faces were pale, filled with a mixture of desperation and shame. Devin was not in the room. Edward sat at the head of the table, looking 10 years older. "Thank you for coming, Donald," the chairman said, gesturing to a seat. I did not sit down immediately. I stood at the end of the table, looking at each of them. "Let us save some time," I said. "Your stock is down 55%. 3 of your largest institutional investors have liquidated their positions. The industry press is predicting bankruptcy by the end of the quarter. You need me to convince Alan Pierce to return, which is going to be incredibly difficult because you showed him how unstable your leadership is." The chairman nodded slowly. "We know. What are your terms?" I opened my leather folder and slid a 3-page document across the table. "These are non-negotiable. If you change a single word, I walk out, and you can file for Chapter 11 by Friday." The chairman took the document and began to read. As his eyes moved down the first page, his eyebrows shot up. He passed it to Edward, whose face turned a shade of gray that matched his suit. "Donald, this is—" Edward started, his voice trailing off as he looked at the terms. "It is exactly what it takes to get me back," I said, finally sitting down and crossing my legs. The document was drafted by my personal attorney. The terms were severe. First, I demanded full reinstatement with a salary triple my previous rate. Second, I wanted a seat on the board of directors with full voting rights. Third, I required absolute strategic autonomy over all operations and restructuring. The CEO would no longer have the authority to veto my operational decisions. Fourth, I demanded a 5% equity stake in the company, vested immediately. But it was the fifth clause that made the board members exchange worried glances. It was a clause regarding new business initiatives. It stated that any new venture or product line developed under my leadership while employed at the firm would remain 60% my personal property. The firm would receive 40% of the equity and revenue, but I would retain controlling interest and intellectual property rights. "This fifth clause is highly irregular, Donald," the corporate counsel said, adjusting his glasses. "Typically, any intellectual property created by an employee belongs entirely to the corporation. Typically, a corporation does not fire its lead negotiator because of his medical footwear," I replied. "Let us talk about the legal reality here. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, specifically 42 U.S.C. Section 12(1)(1), you terminated an employee with a documented medical condition who was using prescribed orthopedic footwear without engaging in any interactive process or offering reasonable accommodation. That is a federal civil rights violation. If I file a formal complaint with the EEOC and follow up with a lawsuit, the details of how Devin Bennett fired me on signing day will become public record. Your stock will not just slide, it will crater." The room went dead silent. The board members looked at each other. They knew I had them cornered. A public ADA lawsuit on top of a collapsed merger would be the final blow to the firm's reputation. "What about Orion?" Edward asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Can you actually bring Alan back?" "I cannot guarantee it," I said, "but I am the only one he will talk to. If you sign this agreement right now, I will make the call. If you do not, I am going to the EEOC office this afternoon." The chairman looked around the table. No one spoke. No one raised an objection. He picked up his pen and signed his name at the bottom of the document. One by one, the other board members did the same. Edward signed last, his hand shaking slightly as he wrote his signature. "Welcome back, Donald," the chairman said, sliding the signed contract back to me. I took the document, placed it in my folder, and stood up. "I will start immediately. I want Devon's desk cleared out of the operations floor by 5 p.m. My first call was to Alan Pierce. We met for lunch at a quiet diner outside the city. Alan was eating a sandwich when I walked in, and he grinned when he saw me. "I saw the stock price," Alan said. "I figured you would be calling. Did they crawl back to you?" "They signed my terms," I said, sitting down. "I have a seat on the board and complete operational control." "Good," Alan said, leaning forward. "But Donald, the original deal is dead. My partners are spooked. If we do this merger now, the valuation has to change. We are not paying $4 billion anymore. The new figure is $3.2 billion, and we want stricter oversight on the management structure." I knew this was coming. The company's drop in stock value and reputation meant we had lost our leverage. But $3.2 billion was still enough to save the firm and protect the jobs of the 800 employees who worked there. "I agree," I said. "I will convince the board, but I want your personal commitment that you will support my restructuring plan once the deal closes." "You have it," Alan said. "I trust you, Donald. I just do not trust the Bennett family." Over the next month, I worked 16-hour days to rebuild the merger framework. It was grueling, but I was in control now. I restructured the debt, consolidated our departments, and laid off several of the senior executives who had supported Devon's appointment. They were the dead weight that had been dragging the firm down for years. I saw Devon occasionally in the office. He had been moved to a cubicle in the back of the research department, far away from any client contact. He looked miserable, his previous arrogance replaced by a quiet, defensive glare. I did not speak to him, and he did not look at me. I had more important things to focus on. My plan was already moving to the next stage. The fifth clause in my contract was not a defensive measure. It was the foundation for my new project. I had realized during my week off that the corporate clothing market was ripe for disruption. The rigid, archaic dress codes that companies used to control their employees were out of touch with modern reality, especially for professionals who needed comfort due to health or age. I called Clara Jenkins into my office. Clara was our head of creative design and marketing, a talented woman who had been sidelined by Edward because her ideas were too progressive. "Clara, I need a side project," I told her. "Something small, experimental, and completely separate from our financial analytics core." She looked intrigued. "What kind of project?" "We are going to start a professional apparel line," I said, "specifically focused on adaptive and ergonomic corporate wear, elegant clothes that can adjust to different standards, and professional shoes that have orthopedic support built in without looking like medical gear." Clara stared at me, a smile slowly spreading across her face. "Donald, are you serious?" "Dead serious," I said. "And we are going to call it Adaptations." Clara embraced the project with an energy I had not seen in years. Within 2 weeks, she had put together a small team of 4 designers and researchers. We kept the project quiet, working in a small conference room on the basement level. My contract allowed me to use company resources as long as the firm was properly compensated, which I documented down to the last dollar. We started by interviewing professionals, both men and women, about their experiences with corporate dress codes. The feedback was consistent. People were tired of stiff, uncomfortable clothes that did not accommodate physical changes, injuries, or long hours of travel. Our first product line focused on professional footwear. We designed high-end leather dress shoes for men and elegant flats for women that looked like premium corporate wear but featured medical-grade arch support, shock-absorbing soles, and flexible materials. We also developed a line of adjustable professional clothing, suits with hidden stretch waistbands, and shirts with convertible collars. I funded the initial prototype run with my own money, using a small manufacturer in North Carolina. When the first samples arrived, I started wearing them to the office. One Monday, I wore a pair of our black leather Oxford shoes. They looked identical to the high-end Italian dress shoes that Edward wore, but they had the comfort of my orthopedic walking shoes. Edward actually complimented them during a meeting. "Nice shoes, Donald," he said. "Glad to see you are back to our standards." I smiled. "Thank you, Edward. They are indeed very comfortable." Within 3 months, we had a fully functional website and our first batch of inventory. We decided to launch the brand with a very specific marketing campaign. Clara had written a series of short profiles on professionals who had struggled with rigid corporate rules. The central theme was that true professionalism is defined by capability and character, not by arbitrary clothing measurements. For the final touch, I insisted that every item shipped from our warehouse include a small, high-quality card. The card detailed the origin of the brand, how a senior strategist with 30 years of experience was fired on the day of a $4 billion merger because he wore medical shoes, and how that moment of humiliation led to the creation of comfortable, adaptive clothing for professionals. It was a bold move, but it was authentic. It was the story that would connect with people. The night before the official launch, I called an all-hands meeting in the main auditorium. All 800 employees attended, including the board members and Edward. In the back row, I saw Devin Bennett sitting quietly in his polo shirt, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. I stood on the stage wearing our signature suit and Oxfords. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "Today is a significant milestone. We have successfully stabilized our core financial business. The merger with Orion Capital is on track to close next month at $3.2 billion. But tonight, I want to talk about the future." I clicked the remote, and the screen behind me lit up with the Adaptations logo. "For the past 6 months, a small team has been developing a new business line," I said. "We are launching Adaptations, a brand dedicated to professional clothing and footwear that prioritizes comfort, health, and flexibility." Murmurs ran through the crowd. The executives in the front row looked at each other, confused. This was not a financial product. Every piece in this collection is designed to adapt to the real needs of working professionals, I continued. We believe that no one should have to choose between their health and their career. I clicked to the next slide, showing our marketing campaign and the story card that would accompany every product. The screen displayed the text of the card clearly, including the story of my firing. The auditorium went dead silent. No one looked at Devin, but everyone knew exactly who the story was about. Edward looked down at his lap, his face turning red. "Under my contract, which was approved by the board, this venture will operate as an independent entity," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Bennett Financial Solutions holds a 40% equity stake, which will provide a new revenue stream for this firm. The remaining 60% is held by me. We launch tomorrow morning." After the meeting, Edward followed me to my office. He closed the door behind him, his face tight with anger. "Donald, what is this?" he demanded. "You are airing our dirty laundry to the public. That story card is a direct attack on my son and this company's reputation." "It is not an attack, Edward. It is the truth," I said, setting my folder on the desk. "Your son fired me in the lobby in front of 20 people. That was public. The consequence of that action is also public. The story is the very reason people will buy these products. It shows we understand the problem because we lived it." He leaned against the desk, his anger fading into exhaustion. "This is going to ruin Devin's chance of ever moving back up in this firm." "Devin needs to learn that actions have consequences, Edward. You should have taught him that years ago. Now the market is going to teach him." The launch was scheduled for 8 a.m. the next day. By noon, the response had exceeded all our projections. The story had been picked up by a major business blog, and by 3 p.m., we had sold out of our entire initial run of footwear. The message of professional dignity had resonated deeply with thousands of corporate workers across the country. Within 2 weeks of the launch, Adaptations was featured in 3 national business publications. The headline in the Financial Times read, "How a firing over footwear created the next trend in corporate apparel." Orders were flooding in faster than our manufacturer in North Carolina could produce them. Then Alan Pierce gave an interview on CNBC. When the reporter asked about the pending merger with Bennett Financial Solutions, Alan smiled and pointed to his feet. "I am actually wearing Adaptations Oxfords right now," Alan said. "They are the most comfortable shoes I have worn in 20 years, and I am proud to support a venture led by Donald Vance. He is a man who understands that value is built by people, not by dress codes." That interview went viral. Our website traffic spiked by 400%, temporarily crashing our servers. By the end of our first quarter, Adaptations had generated more revenue than the firm's core consulting division. The 40% equity stake held by Bennett Financial Solutions had become the most valuable asset on their balance sheet, single-handedly lifting the company's stock price back to pre-crisis levels. The $3.2 billion merger with Orion Capital closed smoothly 3 months later. The firm was saved, the 800 jobs were secure, and the board members were thrilled. But the balance of power had shifted permanently. I was no longer just an employee. I was the majority owner of the company's most profitable asset. 1 year after the day I was fired, I called another company-wide meeting. The atmosphere in the auditorium was completely different this time. The anxiety of the previous year was gone, replaced by energy and optimism. I took the stage, looking out at the crowd. Edward sat in the front row, looking relaxed for the first time in years. Further back, I saw Devin. He had spent the last 12 months working as a junior researcher, entering data and doing market analysis under a strict supervisor. The arrogance was entirely gone from his face. He looked like someone who had spent a year learning what hard work actually meant. 1 year ago today, I stood in the lobby with a cardboard box, having just been terminated. I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. Today, I am proud to announce that Adaptations is officially spinning off into a fully independent corporation. The crowd broke into applause. Bennett Financial Solutions will retain its 40% stake, which has already generated over $15 million in dividends. For this firm, I continued. But the main operations will move to our new headquarters next month. I paused, letting the room quiet down. With the profits from this first year, I am also establishing the Vance Foundation for Workplace Equity. The foundation will provide grants and legal support to employees who have faced discrimination or arbitrary termination. Our first initiative will be a fellowship program for young professionals who have made significant career-ending mistakes but want to learn, grow, and rebuild their professional lives. I looked directly at Devin. The fellowship will offer hands-on mentorship, business training, and a chance to work within our new apparel division. The application process is open to anyone, including employees of this firm. After the meeting, as the crowd was dispersing, I was packing my laptop into my bag when I saw Devin standing near the stage. He was holding a folder in his hand, his posture hesitant. "Donald," he said, his voice quiet. "Do you have a minute?" I stopped and looked at him. "Yes, Devin." He walked up the steps to the stage, his eyes on the floor before he looked up to meet my gaze. "I want to apologize," he said, "for what happened last year. I was young. I wanted to show everyone I was in charge, and I did not think about the consequences. I was stupid." "It took you a year to say that, Devin." "I know," he said, swallowing hard. "I needed that year. Working in the research division, it was hard. Nobody cared who my father was. I actually had to do the work. I read the story card on your shoes every day. It reminded me of what I did." He held out the folder. "This is my application for the fellowship program. I do not expect any favors. I know my father cannot help me here, but I want to learn how to build something real instead of just enforcing rules." I took the folder, looking down at it. The title on the cover read, Devin Bennett, Fellowship Application. "The selection committee handles the applications, Devin," I said. "I do not interfere with their decisions, but I am glad you applied." He nodded, a look of relief washing over his face. "Thank you, Donald." He turned and walked down the steps. For the first time, he was not rushing or swaggering. He walked with the steady pace of someone who knew exactly where he was going. The committee eventually accepted Devin into the alternate program. He did not get a free ride. He spent his first 6 months working in our warehouse, packing boxes of shoes and shipping them to customers. He did not complain once. Today, Adaptations is a national brand, and the Vance Foundation has helped over 200 professionals rebuild their careers. Edward Bennett stepped down as CEO 6 months ago, and the board appointed a professional manager who focused on strategic growth rather than family legacy. As for me, I still wear my black orthopedic shoes when my foot aches on rainy days. But now, when people look at my shoes in the lobby, they do not sneer. They ask me where they can buy a pair. The best revenge is not destroying the people who tried to hurt you. It is building something so significant that they have no choice but to respect it, and then giving them the opportunity to grow from their own mistakes. If you have made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. I would love to know what part resonated most with you. Was it the confrontation in the lobby, the return with my own terms, or the way we turned a moment of humiliation into a new path? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If this story meant something to you, please hit the like button and subscribe. It helps us share more stories of resilience and growth. Thank you for being a part of this journey.